A majority of humans now live in cities, and that number is only going to rise, which means more cars, more factories, and more power plants. A new report from the Nature Conservancy shows that planting trees can be a cost-effective way to improve public health.
The 3.6-mile tunnel would transport fans in passenger pods to the ballpark.
The world's slums lack not only large, easy-to-travel roads, but they're also missing a lot of the infrastructure that goes along with them. Street signs, building numbers, and vehicle access to building exterior. Now, scientists are trying to transform slums with a mathematical approach to urban design called topology.
The building that will compose the city will all be hosting trees and plants on their facade.
So we have to do here with a urbanization phenomenon, which is major in the world, is a productive landscape, and contains maybe half of the urbanized population.
According to the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, it's estimated that by 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in cities. As more and more people make this move from country to city, how we design these urban spaces is becoming more complex. How do we accommodate these new needs for mobility, nutrition, accommodation, and pollution control? What's the role of the citizen living in these spaces? How can we create physically sustainable communities? My name is Noa A, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. We'll start off with a 40-minute discussion, followed by a brief intermission, and finally close with some audience questions. This panel will investigate the changing nature of urban planning and ask whether there is a one-size-fits-all model for such a mobile population. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. On my left is Professor Kees Chistiaanse from the Netherlands. He's an architect and urban planner and founder of KCAP Architects and Planners. He's an expert in the development of university campuses, railway areas, and international urban developments. Next to him is Miss Carolyn from the UK. She's taught at several prestigious UK universities such as Cambridge and the London School of Economics. Carolyn is a leading thinker on food and cities. Her first book, Hungry City, won international acclaim, and her second book, Cytopia, is coming out next year. Next to her is Estefania Tapias from Colombia. She's a researcher, lecturer, and project coordinator at ETH, where she obtained her PhD on urban climate and future cities. Estefania is committed to building initiatives in communities that support and shape the future of societies. And lastly, on my far left, is Marin Quorum from Switzerland. She's a board member of the European Energy Award and manager director for Energiestadt, an award program supporting cities and authorities on becoming energy efficient within Switzerland. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. First, I'd like to ask Maren to put this issue into context. Can you briefly explain why it's so important how we consider that we plan the cities of the future?
Yes, that's a good question. But yeah, it is important to plan the cities of the future because, as you said, a huge part of the population will be living in the cities in the near future, and a lot of energy is consumed in the municipalities, in the cities, and a lot of goods are consumed in the cities. So I think it will be the most important topic to plan that on a long-term, sustainable way. What we do is we get involved very much with the local authorities, with the local level, because we think that the local authorities and the local administration is very close to the citizens, very close to what happens on the city level, and they have a huge responsibility of developing and planning and designing a sustainable environment. And so our main target group is the local authorities. Our system focuses on them, and I think they are the right people the right organization, the right level to really develop sustainable cities. And yeah, I hope this will be successful.
And I'd also like to ask Estefania whether she could shed light on why it's important that we have a panel on this topic.
Well, I actually think that this is one of the most important aspects of a sustainable future environment in the world, because most of the population are living in cities, and it's very important that actually the cities are reflecting how sustainable they are developing, and also that the citizens also learn in many ways behavior and many other aspects how to act in a more sustainable way.
And I'd like to change gears a bit and turn to Kees and ask you, what does a sustainable city mean to you? Is there some kind of blueprint that developing cities should be looking at?
Well, maybe I can start with reacting a little bit, because first of all, the majority of the world's population does not live in cities, but rather lives in urbanized landscapes. And there is also a blur in the transition between the city and the country and the wilderness. And therefore it is very difficult to talk about the city without thinking about more less concentrated areas. So if you, for instance, look at the island of Java in Indonesia, this is an island which is the same size as the United Kingdom, but it has 250 million people. And these 250 million people are more, apart from the chain of volcanoes, are more or less evenly distributed across this island. There's only one very big city, which is Jakarta, which has 25 million people or so. But the rest of the people are dispersed in a very small scale, divided agricultural, urbanized landscape. And this is one of the major conditions in the future of world urbanization, to look at much more than concentrated cities. If you look at the Mittelland in Switzerland, ranging from St. Gallen to Geneva, this is the area where most people in Switzerland live. About 70% of the people in Switzerland live in that area. Only a little bit of that surface is concentrated city. Most of it is a urbanized landscape, alternating between industry, agriculture, villages, infrastructure, etc. And it is paramount to concentrate as urban designers and also as politicians on these urbanized landscapes. Exactly because there the food production takes place, and food production still needs an enormous amount of surface. And exactly because these situations are extremely unsustainable, because the length of traffic and technical infrastructure is so large in relation to one person per square kilometer, that the whole condition is extremely expensive. On the other hand, we have the very concentrated city, like the center of Zurich or Hong Kong, if you like. These cities are actually, in a sense, quite sustainable, because they are so dense, and the sharing part of energy, waste disposal, traffic, real estate is so large in relationship to those urbanized landscapes, that the ecological footprint of an average urbanist, urban resident in a very concentrated city is already quite advantageous in relation to, for instance, suburban conditions. And also because of the concentration of the city leads to a condition in which people are interacting and rubbing and having friction with each other. The kind of mechanism of settlement of efficiency of systems is higher than outside. So my message is, first we should look at the comprehensive situation of city and outside, and all the grades in between of concentration. And secondly, we should abandon this myth about this world population living in cities, because the majority lives in these urbanized landscapes. And these urbanized landscapes are one of the models of urbanization where we should concentrate on, because if we do not get them sustainable, then we are much farther away than before.
So this question is to both Kees and Carolyn, that both of your work revolves a lot around the interaction between city and countryside. And so even though, you know, the city itself might not realize how connected they are with the countryside, they are. How can city and country interact in the most optimum, harmonious system? Perhaps you can.
Well, I mean, I think it's very interesting hearing what Kees has just said, because I think food is not the only, by any means, but the most immediately graspable and the most totally connecting lens through which we can ask this question. And in my talk earlier, I was speaking about Aristotle's term, he calls humans political animals, which I think is a very helpful term because it describes our need to be with one another in the dark. So political animals, so we need sociability and to be able to see people, but also animals, which means we need nature. And if you look at the evolution of cities, it is this kind of dance between, that's great. Hello. It's this dance between the need for sociability and, you know, I mean, historically cities were extremely dense because they couldn't afford not to be, which is interesting. And on the other hand, the landscapes that sustained them. So what happens with first the train and then, more importantly, the motor car, you know, the ability to sort of just more or less travel anywhere you like, as we get this spreading out of the urban landscape that Kees is referring to. It's unsustainable because, you know, all the services that you need and basically, you know, everything that you need other than sort of sitting on your sofa watching telly involves going long distances. So what I say is that what we need is a densification of urbanity, but also, if you like, an intensification of farming. And my formula for this, and it can happen at any scale, which is really important, is that you maximise the interface between the urban and the rural. Now, you know, that can happen at the scale of Tokyo, you know, because at the moment there is no maximised interface, you've just got an absolutely enormous metropolitan blob. But you can post-fit productivity into it, into the existing city. We're already seeing that in the cities in the West, you know, the reintroduction of urban agriculture and such things, vertical farms, we can talk about those if you're interested. But in terms of developing cities, it's really important, this is, by the way, absolutely not a new idea, that instead of just building cities assuming the food's going to magically come in from somewhere else, we actually integrate food production in development. And this was the idea behind the green belts, for example, was to limit the size of a city and then have a ring of rural productive land around it. It doesn't have to be done that way, it can be done with corridors, but it's just incorporating the idea of food production into our planning. So essentially we, as I say, maximise the interface between the urban and the rural. And that for me is the ideal scenario for a political animal. But of course it means that you have to farm organically, and you have to farm in a way that there is something of nature in the way that you farm. And that's a whole other question, but it's an important one.
Yeah, I think I can agree on that. I think I just talked about a Mittelland in Switzerland. It's a little bit comparable to the west of the Netherlands, which is called the Randstad, which contains Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague and Utrecht. And these areas are what we call network cities. So they are actually large urban constellations on the one hand, but they consist out of middle-sized cities that are very well connected by public transport and by other infrastructures. And they are embedded in a landscape of predominantly still agricultural production. but also industry, etc. And these areas maybe are, in terms of quality of life and in terms of looking for a balance between the urban and the rural, a better future, a better urban future than very large metropolises, because very large metropolises have such an enormous waste aura around them of all kinds of very complicated logistics that have to be accomplished in order to let them function and in order to organize the flows of, for instance, food in and out, which those highly developed network cities don't have. Now the problem is these highly developed network conditions do not exist everywhere. They are very rare, and if you transform and transfer it to what I just said about Java in Indonesia, of course the average Javanese is very sustainable because he doesn't consume a lot, and he has his own rice paddy. But the technical infrastructure, the traffic infrastructure, the public transport, the whole logistics systems are so bad that there's a total gridlock and a total increase of inefficiency, pollution, and just bad use of the space going on. So this can only be tackled in a condition where we have the opportunity to establish highly sophisticated flows for public transport, for goods, and other infrastructures.
So I'd like to take a step back now slightly. After all, a city is more than just buildings and sidewalks and physical space. It's also the people that live in it. So, Estefania, what do you think is the role of an individual resident in creating a sustainable city?
Yes, I would say that maybe in the later years we have focused too much on the smart city, and developers or city planners have really got so involved in the whole idea of smart cities because it sounds sexy, because it's technology, because technology is developing and so on. But we are a bit losing the sense of where the citizen takes place in this whole development. And that's why we thought about we started exploring how you can get the citizen involved without really jeopardizing the whole development of the technology, really like involving the citizen in the process of the technology in this way. So, I mean, the idea is not to really completely ignore the whole innovation that is going around, but it's really how to get the people involved. And then, in this sense, I mean, we decided to develop different projects that to explore, because it's not something that we know already how to do it, but we wanted to explore more or less with people how all their needs and wishes and their thoughts can be involved in the whole development process. And using tools that are born from the technology that nowadays we have. So, I mean, for example, nowadays everyone has a smartphone, everyone has most of the people have access to the internet, the ones that are in cities. People are getting very handy with all of this technology aspects. And then what if you can also, you as a citizen and with your technological skills, can really get involved in what the city government is doing and how the city government can involve you through all of these tools. And then in that way, you are, as a city developer, you're developing a city that it's inside the whole concept of the smart city, but really like involving the people, and that's how we want to come across as the responsive city, which Kees is very familiar with also. On how to build from the whole technology developing the smart city, but really bringing again the citizen in the center of the attention and exploring what their needs, what their wishes, what their uncomforts and so on, can understanding them and how can we solve it together using the technology.
In similar vein, I'd like to ask Maren. Today, our audience is primarily high schoolers. We aren't architects, engineers, or planners, so what can we, the youth, do to interact with this concept of cities of the future more directly?
I think it's important what we heard before from Estefania, that so we are all citizens in some way, so we don't need to be professionals on specific technical or whatever topics. So what we need to take on is our role as a citizen, as, for example, someone living in an urbanized area, someone working with others. So we should all get involved in what is happening. And in my statement at the beginning, I mentioned that the local level is, for us, the most important level to improve sustainability and to be a driver on sustainability. And so everyone can get involved in what is happening on the local level. And what we are also very much focusing on is, what I would like to bring in is in addition, the level of neighborhoods. So I think what is happening at the moment in Switzerland, in particular, is that sites are developed in a different way than 10 or 20 years ago. So you try to see it more sustainable, more comprehensive. You include social aspects, you include aspects of how people can live together, how they build up communities, and also get involved and engage themselves in how a sustainable community can be developed. And I think this is something that everyone, independent from what profession he has or what he's able to do on a professional way, can get involved and support that. And I think that is a very important duty that we have as well, and responsibility.
Would anyone else like to add anything on to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're living in very interesting times, as the Chinese like to say. We've had technological advances at a speed that no previous humans in history have ever had to deal with. I mean, I did not grow up with computers, let alone mobile phones. And in order to be sociable and in order to see one another, we actually used to either pick up a landline or we used to go into a physical space, and it honestly was a totally different way of socializing. And I think, I think technology is both a real opportunity, but it's also something that we have to really make sure that we remain in control of, and we actually ask the question, what is a good life? What is a social life? How should we live well in the city? And allow technology to enable that. So I'd absolutely agree with what both Estefania and Maren have just said. I think if the city becomes just a kind of a technologically enabled service machine, where you get your food, you get your entertainment online, you work online, then there's a real question of whether we're being the political part of the political animal. By the way, I'd just like to add, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was brilliant on saying that you don't just get to be a citizen by being born, you have to work at it. And for a good society to work, people have to become citizens, which means being educated, being engaged, actually becoming involved in public activities. And without that, there is no society. So I think we need to really revisit the question of how we're going to work to become proper citizens. It's not a right to be a citizen. You have to actually put work in to get the good stuff out. So I think that's a really important thing to remember too.
Yeah, just to add to this, so technology can only be a mean, it can't be the goal. I think that's very important to have that. To consider that, and currently in Switzerland, in Europe as well, and also worldwide, the topic of smart city is getting very much important, and it's a topic or vision which is in a lot of is very much favored by a lot of organizations. But I think that smart city cannot work without smart citizens and smart governance as well. So it's also only a mean to develop something or develop a city which is sustainable and which creates a good living space and high quality of life. So I think we always need to consider what is the mean, what is the goal, and what do we want to achieve as well. So I think that's very important.
I think this is actually the perfect place to stop for a moment and have a short break. Thank you so much, everyone, for those absolutely fascinating contributions. So we'll have a short intermission now to generate some questions. You have 5 minutes. You can either prepare them to ask, we'll have some roving mics for you to raise your hand for, or you can tweet us your question with the hashtag YFS2019. You're encouraged to talk to your neighbours, but please stay in your seats. So we'll now start taking questions from the audience. We actually, I think, have a really good Twitter question to start with, which might be applicable for some of our members in the audience. If someone is interested in the topic of sustainable cities, what kind of university courses could they study to get involved? Perhaps Carolyn seems really eager to start.
Well, I'm an architect, and you could find a lot worse places to start than that. I mean, it's, architecture isn't just about buildings, it's actually about, the whole question of how we dwell as political animals. Obviously planning, geography. I mean, I think ultimately it depends what your natural inclinations are, because any subject could be helpful in this. Biology. I mean, I've got into food because in a way I wanted to move away from buildings actually to the question of how we live in a more profound way, and actually, I suddenly realised I need every discipline on the planet to ask this question. So I think it's very open, but I mean, I'm very happy that I studied architecture, because I think that gives you a very good overview, and very importantly, it helps you to see how all the different aspects of this are connected, and that's possibly, systems thinking we've been talking about a lot today, but being able to see the big picture, but also being able to act, I think, so being flexible in that way, architecture certainly helps.
Yeah, I have to say that it's more a mindset more than a subject, because I mean, it's just if you have the drive of making or getting involved in creating a better world in terms of sustainability, it doesn't matter what subject or in which university you study. It's really like that your drive on that mindset, and then you just study like a field that you're interested in, and then just filter that your knowledge into sustainability. I mean, it's really just mindset.
Do we have any audience questions? I believe we have some over here.
So, hi, my name is Isaac Glover, and my question is to whoever wants to answer it on the panel. But we've spoken a lot today about new strategies for planning cities and new ways to design cities. What about the cities that already exist, these big urban centres like New York or London? What sort of strategies can we do or put in place to help make those better?
Would you like to answer that, Kees?
Yeah, there's a very simple answer to that. The design of new cities is a bad thing. And we are basically, urban design is about transformation of the status quo of existing structures. And this is an ongoing, eternal process. So we are not, let's say, working on cities so much from scratch, but we are much more working on the continuous upgrade and transformation of urban conditions. And so what you say is actually the reverse. City planning in terms of creating new towns is more like a rare and in many cases an undesirable activity, whereas the constant monitoring and working on existing settlements is extremely important.
I believe we also had a question in the back.
Hi, so I'm for Maren, yeah. So what are your goals in this entire event? What's your goal?
I'm sorry, I'm too good. You work with Energiestadt,
yes.
Right? what are their goals towards creating smarter cities?
So Energiestadt is a quality management system. What we try to find out is what is the scope of action that each municipality individually has, and then to try to support them in implementing what are their possibilities, what are their opportunities for making the city more sustainable. On the mobility and transport sector, on the energy sector, the building sector, planning, cooperations with third parties and whatever. So it's very individual for each municipality, and this is what we need to find out first, to define what is the possibility of this individual municipality, and that could be different in Lucerne than in, for example, in Bern or in Zurich or in smaller cities, in rural municipalities. So we first need to find out what they can do, and then support them in achieving that. And I think it's very important to not to think there is one goal or one possible solution for each and every city in the same way, but it needs to be individually defined. And I think this is one of the success elements of Energiestadt.
So we have another Twitter question, which I believe is aimed to Carolyn, asking, would it be beneficial to have small community-owned and government-supplemented farms around the city in large amounts, as opposed to a large-scale farm solely owned by the city government?
Of food supply?
I think this is
okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, looking at what might constitute a good life in the 21st century, clearly, Kees has already raised this issue. We need to move around less, or at least in more efficient ways. Food is interesting because it has to reach us physically. It's a physical thing. I know they're 3D printing meat or whatever, that's just utter distraction. In the end, you're holding a banana in your hand, that came from South America, essentially. So the reason I love food as a way of questioning how we live is that it's physical and it's every day as well. It's the only thing we have to consume every day. So this makes it very easy to sort of trace our footprint through food. But we also need to live good lives. What does that mean? I mean, we need to be happy, we need to be fulfilled, we need to have meaningful relationships, we have to progress through life, and at the same time we have to not externalise the cost of our life on the rest of the planet. To me, all of this points towards a more localised mixed economy. And it's not just food, it's all sorts of manufacturing, it's repair, it's a sort of social system, if you like, which is more like an old-fashioned village, although no doubt at a much bigger scale now, but nevertheless with all those kinds of virtues. And yes, I mean, I'm absolutely a believer, and this is, by the way, an anarchist idea, and the anarchists, by the way, no, don't prejudge the anarchists. They're very misunderstood and misrepresented. They're very, very interesting thinkers. They're actually about greater local autonomy, and they're also, very interestingly, against division of labour as a precursor to any economic system. I can't get into it in huge detail, but the short answer is that small-scale production and consumption that may, sort of actually feed into a lot of other things apart from just I need to eat, I need to travel, I need to work, but it actually becomes more meaningful. Maybe it's more craft-based. Maybe you're actually doing work with people who you like and know in other contexts. There's many, many aspects of this, but I think it's all part of moving towards a good life in a steady state economy, which is what we have to do. And it's not anti-technological, by the way, and it's not saying we don't need bigger governance structures, because we absolutely do. In fact, I would say that, the nation state is becoming less and less relevant as a scale of effective government. I think we need much stronger, smaller scale, and much stronger, bigger scale, actually. But yes, that all fits into a much bigger picture. So it's not just so we have nice artisanal cheese. It's actually part of a whole move to a more localised, socialised economy. So yes, would be a short answer to that.